Alrighty. Ooh, hi there. We're back. And we're going to be talking CSS in context of Web 2.0 and all that good stuff. For the rest of the afternoon, Molly Holzschlag is going to be holding down the fort on this front. Andy Clark was unable to join her due to some travel issues that he had getting here from the UK. And this session and the one immediately following it will be in this room, and then part 3 of 3 will be a general session that will be back in the room where we met this morning. Many of you, if you don't know the name Molly or the URL molly.com, you should. She is one of the great minds in this scene. She is a group lead of the Web Standards Project, that fabulous organization that has done so much to advocate the adoption of web standards on the part of not only the browser vendors, but also the tools creators. And she has got more than 30 books under her pen, one of the latest of which is The Zen of CSS Design. There's a guy named Dave Shea, who many of you may be familiar with the site csszengarden.com. She co-authored the book, The Zen of CSS Design, with Dave. And it's a fabulous look at the world of cascading style sheets. We are thrilled, as always, when she graces the Lizard's podium. So please say good afternoon to Molly Holzschlag.
Thank you. What a lovely introduction, Jim. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me now? Great. It's so nice to be here. Thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us for a fabulous conference in Seattle, one of my favorite cities. Just to find out a little bit about you, I'd like to do a little poll. How many people in here consider themselves visual designers? So quite a large amount of you. And how many people would consider yourself more of the client-side developer? XHTML, HTML, CSS authoring, some JavaScript, that sort of thing? Okay, so actually less developers. And how many people fill other roles such as content-oriented, editorial, anything of that nature? Great. How about management folks trying to find a way through all this muck? Okay, great. Anybody else who didn't fit into one of those silos, because we are, of course, an industry of people who wear many hats. So anybody here with an interesting job description that did not fit into any of those that would like to share? Any takers? I'm really good at making victims out of people if they don't volunteer for me, so forewarned. Come on, somebody. Who's doing a really unusual job right now? Anybody? Everybody's doing, okay, you've got one. Oh, so if you got something to write about, talk to that man. He can get you a book deal. You'll make a lot of money. Trust me, you won't. Okay, well, let me give you a little bit of information about what we're going to do today and how I'm seeing what path I'm going to take here so that the expectations are set well between us and that any of your concerns are addressed along the way. The first section, these three segments have been designed so that they each are standalone sessions, but they also relate to one another in that they can build upon one another in terms of understanding a greater bird's eye view of what the heck is going on in the industry today. So really, if we were to put it all in a nutshell, the next hours with you is all about kind of road mapping and figuring out best practices, what to do with all of the buzzwords we're hearing. So, you know, how do you as a designer or a developer or a person who signs authors to books, you know, figure out the way to get from here to there, use your skills, enhance your skills, and so forth and so on. So the first section is actually not so much about CSS at all. What I'm going to be talking about is philosophy about Web 2.0, what Web 2.0 consists of, some of the Ajax variants, what to expect. How many people here, obviously there's a lot of Ajax stuff, how many people here are actually working with JavaScript and Ajax regularly? See, so a few of you are, but the vast majority of you are not, and perhaps are not as familiar really with how to separate what is hype, what is reality, what you need to be evaluating as potentially good for your websites and the things that you're working on. So I'm going to help you sort of roadmap through that and try and get to a specific clarity that will help you as you make decisions regarding how to use the current technologies to the best. Then the second session will go on into how to use CSS, not how to design so much, but ways, strategies in which to deal with workflow, how to organize CSS, how to use CSS effectively. that sort of thing. So from more of a technical standpoint, but very helpful to designers as well, to understand a lot about how CSS can be used, not just for design, but in tandem with design. And finally, the general session will be a lot of yummy, yummy stuff for the designers, in which we look at all the things we talked about and then break out of some of the thinking that we've been kind of carrying around with us for so long due to the time factor and the legacy browser issues and all of that. Okay? So I would like 3 volunteers, and I said I will happily make you a victim if I don't get the volunteers, to tell me their name, their current position, and what they are currently most frustrated with, their point of real frustration in their job in relation to web design and development. So 3 hands. 1, 2, and then we'll do, let's see, a woman. So, okay, so how about the guy in the back, and then we'll move over here, and then this lovely lady down here. Oh boy. Yes, the second, not this session, but after this, and then the third session. Both of those will be really good information for you. They'll hold a lot of, hopefully, not only inspirational, but very practical material as to how you deal with a lot of those issues, and also how do you start to get into some of the thinking about how you will do CSS layout. It is not exactly easy to teach that in an hour or 2. So usually that takes days and days and days of intensive training to get people to that point. But I will show you some very helpful tools and things of that nature. Okay, thanks. So from the University of Boulder, and this guy stole your frustration, which is essentially the same: how to use CSS effectively, how to get the most out of layout. So really, I should be doing a session on CSS layouts, but we don't get to do that today. However, any questions that you have regarding CSS, that's in the next session is a perfect time to be asking me. And I will be around also during breaks and whatever. Grab me, talk to me. Anything I can do to help. Yes?
My name is Susan Walton, and I work for City of Longmont, Colorado, web administrator. And my issue is in migrating forward, trying to figure out which technology to use to maintain accessibility for our customers, and talk about Ajax and some of those things that may not necessarily be accessible.
Right. That's a fundamental problem we're having, obviously, in Ajax. And some of the world's best minds are trying to crack that particular nut. We have Joe Clark and we have Derek Featherstone, Canadians, both very. Derek especially interests me in the work he's doing with that particular issue of. And I think with great minds like that, that we are going to start solving some of those problems, but they're not immediate. So in this session, what we're definitely going to do is discuss that issue of, well, how do I figure out, what are the things I need to know, or the buzzwords I'm going to hear. What are the philosophies and the thoughts? Okay, so I give a lot of philosophy in this particular session because I think we're exactly, I know that I'm dealing with that. And I've been in the industry since there was a web industry, and I'm looking at it going, okay, there's a lot of stuff here. How do we sort through this crazy mess and get what we really need to create a website that is completely usable, attractive, accessible, all the yummy things we want it to be the way it should be? How do we get there despite all of the challenges that we face? So it is a very interesting time, I think, in this industry because people are really dedicated to solving these problems, but there are definite issues we need to address. So let's take a look. So, I look at everything going on right now as a real state of confusion. What the heck is going on? We have Web 2.0, and you'll hear many versions of what Web 2.0 is, what it's supposed to be. We have Ajax, of course, the biggest buzz. I have a client right now calls me up and says to me, she's actually an outsourcing company in Connecticut, and she runs this company, and she calls me up and she goes, Molly, I've got at least 10 phone calls. I guess an article came out in the New York Times not too long ago about Ajax and the wonders of Ajaxifying your website. So, of course, she's got all these clients calling her going, you need to Ajaxify my website, or I need my website Web 2.0'd. What does that mean, right? It doesn't mean anything. That's really what it boils down to. We sort of have to figure out what they're saying. Are they just saying it because it's a buzz? Or is there really something legitimate we might be able to do for our client by adding some technology that would enhance its usability or attractiveness or accessibility? We have this whole thing going on with social networking. the web via blogs and other types of technologies has really, really become truly worldwide. So a lot of my own work, I'm not presenting on it here at this conference, but a lot of my own work right now at the W3C is in the internationalization group, and there's some very fascinating things happening there. And microformats, I'll talk about them in this session. What are they? Why are they important? And the semantic web, what is that? Why is that important? So sort of getting our way through all this stuff. So what is Web 2.0? What is it really? Everybody's got an opinion. Anybody have a short soundbite for me? Anybody? Yes?
Oh my goodness, I didn't realize browsers could do this for the last 4 years.
Oh my goodness, I didn't realize browsers could do this for the last 4 years. This is my hero. Exactly. That's also what we could say about Ajax as well. Okay? The XML HTTP request has been around for a long time. All right? And JavaScript has been around even longer. So what the heck? All right? So this is what Tim O'Reilly, who's pretty much, I would say, the purveyor or he's the guy selling 2.0. He says, if you have to advertise, it's probably not Web 2.0. He's looking at it from a sort of social model. Okay? Obviously, Tim is very involved in open source software and the open source movement. So he's looking at it from a social perspective. Nicholas Carr, who's a journalist, says it's a set of technologies that alters the forms and economics of production and consumption. Does anybody know what that means? Because I sure don't. Okay. Web 1.0 is making the internet for people. Web 2.0 is making the internet better for companies. This is Jeff Bezos out of Amazon. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah, I have a problem with this statement, in fact. I think Web 2.0, if there is such a thing, other than hype, is really about making the internet better for people, okay? Not companies. Yeah, if the money is there, great. You know, obviously we're in this for a living. People have to make money, but hey, it is about people. This is my favorite quote from our lovely Jeffrey Veen, who you saw this morning. Web 2.0, heck, Web 1.0 isn't even out of beta. So that to me is a more realistic and humorous look at it. So that's my favorite. Okay, so obviously there are undeniable changes in the way we're working and the way that the web is causing us to work. This gentleman's comment about, well, we had this technology for a few years now, why have we just gotten a clue? That has, you know, something to do with process and the fact that we're in an evolutionary technology. So we have to ask ourselves a question. We have to say, what is it? Is it hype? Is it the fact that the New York Times runs articles on Web 2.0 and it gets into the common culture so people are asking for it even though they don't know what it really means? Or are we really just maturing? I mean, when you think about it, we haven't been around very long. Web design is a very young industry in its infancy. Hasn't even reached its teenage years. Imagine what's going to happen then. So the big answer to all of this is it doesn't really matter what Web 2.0 is and what people say about it. What does matter is to focus on our job, to seek to understand the business, economic, and social issues, right? To educate ourselves about various hot technologies. What are these buzzwords? What do we need to know about them? How can they help us in our particular goal, whatever that might be for our users, our customers, right? And how can they empower us as designers and developers? Where do we put our interest, our effort, our money? And to keep an open mind, because as we all know, well, let me ask you a question. How many people think that everything they know today, it isn't going to change and they will never be challenged? Okay, good. I'm glad you feel that way. So in my not so humble opinion, Web 2.0 is really just maturation. We have passionate, skilled individuals. Your skills are getting better and better and better all the time. The information that's available, the mere fact that you're here, that we have a conference of this nature that is, you know, traveling around the country and really teaching people some important things. We have more collaboration. We have people working together. We're trying to bridge this great divide. We had a nice birds of a feather lunch today where we talked about the great divide between the programmers and designers and how we need to start solving that because we cannot throw pure design solutions at the web, nor can we throw pure technical solutions at the web. We need a balance of both. So how do we do that? I say buddy system, collaboration. And of course we have a reinvigorated economy. If Web 2.0 buzz and hype did anything for us, it opened up jobs and opportunities. So Tim O'Reilly deserves a lot of credit for that. He reinvigorated the web economy, which was really in the dumps. And we see what I call an emerging integration of the silos. I mean, most people here are probably, we also had this conversation over at lunch, most people here are probably wearing many hats, right? How many people only do one thing at their job? Okay, all of you obviously do more than one thing at your job, right? So we also see that an integration of thought rather than a separation of thought becomes important. And so we're seeing that. And therefore, when we begin to collaborate, we can transcend limitations, find solutions, and encourage innovations. Okay, so that to me is really what Web 2.0 is about. So let's break it down, something that we can look at. So ways to see Web 2.0. This is just a philosophical model that I've put in my head that helps me understand and categorize a given technology or aspects of a technology, right, and how it may or may not help me make a decision to deliver something to a client. I look at the business model, I look at the economic model, I look at the social model, and I look to see what technical issues are there as well. Okay? So if you look at the business model, we have to ask, what are we selling, right? An important question if you're selling something on your site, right? Or what are we buying? And how do we extend our ability to do both via multimodal? And when I say that, I mean multiple platforms, okay? So not only just the web on the desktop, but the web to your cell phone or other device. How do we extend this ability using these technologies that are so interesting? And how do we invigorate a global economy, right? We have economic issues around the world. This could really be helpful to us. And, of course, the million-dollar question, if you'll pardon the pun, how do we profit? How do we make money off of this? So another quote from Tim, drive usage, then figure out how to monetize it. I'm not so sure that's what most of us can do. I think it's great if you can, but I don't think everybody can. So let's take a look at the economic model. First of all, the web is a clean industry, right? By the way, you'll see a mismatch between the slides. These are much more detailed, right? So these will be available to you in PDF or Keynote format. I can also make PowerPoint for you available as well. And I'll get those to, I guess, Jim. You can take care of that? Okay, so I'll get them to Jim, and you can get those from the web, from the actual site. So it's a clean industry, right? It means that we don't leave a mess behind, usually, okay? There's nothing environmentally unfriendly about the web itself. It's inexpensive. I mean, when you really think about it, it is probably one of the cheapest forms of media that has ever existed. So it's very inexpensive, very easily available. It's widely trusted now. It didn't used to be, of course, but it has really, really grown. Global in scope, massive in potential, and with few exceptions, it gives power to the individual as well as the many. A very important and key point. And it's great empowerment for nations both economically strong and challenged. One of the very interesting things I've noticed this year is I've been invited on behalf of several governments around the world to come talk to people, because I think that especially isolated areas, Iceland, for example, there was a wonderful conference that a group of us went and presented to the Icelandic government and the people of Iceland in order to talk to them about what's going on in the web. And I think for them, you know, having this model is really fabulous. They understand that this could really be a way for them to reach a huge global audience without, you know, I mean, they're very isolated. If you've ever been to Iceland, you know that. So it's really interesting to see how that's going on. So here's an issue about the trust. eBay has 150 million customers, at least at the time this quote was made. In the nicest terms, that's 150 million people who have learned to trust strangers. So that's a fascinating piece. When we look at 10 years ago, right, the trust issue was very low. And I'm sure you still know people that go, oh, I would never put my credit card information online. But that number of people has really, really significantly diminished very quickly. So it's an interesting phenomenon. We also have a social model. So social networks are strengthened via the medium. So how do we bring this back to, well, I as a designer, why do I need to think this way? Well, you can begin to see where certain uses of technology might fit. If you feel that building a community on your website may enhance your customer service base, then you can look at the social aspects, right? What are we going to do here? You can take the technologies, the blogs, the RSS feeds, all of that stuff, and begin applying it. Okay, that goes in here. So you can match your goals with the technology as opposed to just trying to throw a technical solution at something. Global barriers are softened because of this social networking. And language and culture become emphasized. How many people are currently working on multilingual websites? Do you know when I asked that question a year ago, only 2 people raised their hands. This is what I call the sleeping giant of web design. Okay? Internationalization in general, very, very important and becoming more and more important. So a lot of this is pushing that as well. So, you know, how does this help you as a business? How does this help you as a designer trying to communicate a message Okay, what can you use? What technology, what opportunities are there available to you to reach your customers, your client base better? Benefits from social differences as well as similarities. If you are having a public-facing global website, your opportunities to create large groups of people that are interested in either your products, your services, your information, whatever it is you're providing, you really get to have an experience there, a cultural exchange, if you will. So it's great potential for the web as a tool for positive social change on a massive global scale, which is really very positive. And I love this quote from Kevin Kelly, who was the founding executive editor for Wired magazine. In the years roughly coincidental with the Netscape IPO, humans began animating inert objects with tiny slivers of intelligence, connecting them into a global field and linking their own minds into a single thing. This will be recognized as the largest, most complex, and most surprising event on the planet. That is the World Wide Web. I just love that, but that's maybe because I'm a little touchy-feely. So there's a technical model too, for those of you who are less touchy-feely. Technology and design for the web are changing dramatically, and very quickly, okay? And you all know that because you're sitting in the hot seat along with me trying to figure out, how do I solve a problem today, right? How do I get this solved now? Mastery is not the necessary objective, and this is something I really like to talk a great deal about, and it seems like everybody understands in this particular room that their job is going to require constant learning. I've run up against this in certain environments, and obviously people coming to conferences are not going to be those people, but in certain internal situations where people are so unwilling to change that it's just a bad fit. I don't think you can be in this industry and not be a person who not only accepts change but embraces it and loves it. You don't necessarily need to say, I will become a webmaster. You know, I never liked that term, and I think there's a good reason. Because I don't think any of us will ever master the web in our lifetime. The web perhaps was never meant to be mastered anyway. So we work to the best of our abilities, right? And then that collaborative issue, very important. Ongoing acceptance that you'll always be learning is critical, necessary objective. And herein lies the how do I solve the business problem, how do I solve the design problem, how do I solve, you know, whatever problem it is, by figuring out what the hype is versus the real world. So it's an essential question. Every single thing that comes across your desk, you have to evaluate. So the first time, you know, I heard about Ajax, it was like, well, I published an article that Eric Hatcher wrote on that 8 years ago. What is Ajax? You know, this, essentially the technologies, he was talking about something very similar, right? So we have to really kind of dig. We as the people working the web cannot listen just to the public media. We have to really dig into our own field and people that are doing the good work to find out exactly how it's going to help us. How do we make this separation between what people are asking us for and what is really beneficial? And it may sound a little bit arrogant that we're the only ones that can make that decision, but when your client says, well, I need a Web 2.0 Ajaxified website, what does that really mean? And is there something in there that can truly benefit the users and the customers that you support? If there isn't, then you have to figure out a way to not tell them that there isn't. But there probably is. And I love this quote from Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Flickr. We don't know what we're doing 96% of the time. And I would even say I probably don't feel confident when I'm doing 98% of the time. So I'm not so sure that that's a very stable ground for people to be in, but that is our technology. And again, it's something we either embrace and accept and be open to change, or we have to get out of it because we'll be miserable people. So let's talk about current topics and take the philosophy a little bit more into the practical realm. So web standards, of course. I wouldn't be a good standards evangelist if I didn't have this slide. I think it's in my non-existent contracts somewhere with the Web Standards Project. You must talk about it. You must have your standards slide in there, Molly. So, of course, right now what we're doing, and we'll hear a lot more about this during the next 2 sessions, of course, writing structured semantic markup, meaningful markup. What does an H1 mean? Big one? Big header? Anybody else? Say again? Main header. See the difference? Anybody notice? Big header is what? It's a presentational, Okay? It says, this is how, and believe me, this is I'm picking on you, but I always know that somebody's going to say that because this is the process. We are in a process of change of how we do markup, right? Instead of thinking about H1 being big, bold, and ugly, which is what I always thought of it, so I would go, I really don't like that, so I'll use an H3 there, right? Because I'm getting a presentational result. That's the past, kids, right? Now, H1 means the most important heading on the page, just as if it's your title. You can make it look any way you want. You can make it big, you can make it small, you can make it blue, you can make it green. If you're really clever, you could make it do flips, right? So it's really about separating this idea that presentational markup is no longer the methodology because we have CSS that is efficient in almost all browsers that are probably within your matrix today, with very few exceptions, okay, that at least can give some style to things like H1s. So we focus now on going back to the structure and semantics, the meaning of what those things are, as opposed to what they looked like, okay? Big, critical, important commentary, and if I leave you with nothing else today, that's really where it's at right now. Think very minimal with markup, and I'll teach you some tricks to do that in the next session. And of course, we have CSS. Now, I think the big challenge for people is that CSS is a language for designers, but it's a technical programming language for designers. Hello, designers tend to be visual thinkers, visual learners, and suddenly they're given a programmatic language that has concepts such as a cascade, application hierarchy, specificity, algorithms. How does that make most designers feel? Kind of icky, huh? Yeah, CSS is tough. HTML, XHTML, you can learn it over lunch with me, okay? But CSS, I've been doing it for a long time, and I still feel like completely like a babe in the woods. So it's going to take us a while to sort some of this out, and the best resource we have are each other, okay? So we have to do a lot of talking to people. We have to do a lot of collaborative work with our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues, okay? Attention to accessibility concerns, of course, a really, really important issue. Now, somebody already raised the issue of accessibility here. My opinion, and a commonly held opinion among some of the web thinkers, if you will, is that the mere fact that accessibility is a field of study is sort of redundant because a good website is accessible, okay? A good website is usable. A good website is attractive. A good website complies as much as possible to standards. Okay? If you can start from the ground up. The challenge that we've all had, I think, is that we are busy putting bandages on existing websites. How many people are finding that that's what they're really doing? You have a big legacy site, and you're patching it with CSS, and you're patching it with some JavaScript, and you're trying to change things, but you have all this legacy code. But if we're building from the ground up, all of those issues are easily addressed in the earlier stages. Far more easily addressed from the ground up. Okay? So bringing your usability and accessibility specialists into the room along with the designers and programmers the first day that you begin a process to have that discussion and have them go through the entire iteration of production and beyond is extraordinarily helpful. So consideration of growing platform options. This is a very interesting issue because, of course, the big concern with CSS and the big frustration for so many people is browsers, right? Well, if you think we're having trouble with browsers on the desktop, I would like to introduce you to the mobile web. There's a guy in Japan, I swear to God, this is a true story. There is a guy in Japan that is doing some work for the Web Standards Project, and his job, essentially, his mission, because he's chosen to accept it, is to go out and purchase or buy, beg, or steal, pretty much, every single phone device that he can get his hands on. You better believe. When I was in Japan last year, oh my God, it's amazing. Like every single person you see carries multiple amounts of phones, and each of them do different things. And they're cool. I mean, it's really cool. The technology is beyond belief. But every single one, different browser. All proprietary, right? Very little support for the handheld media type in CSS, which is what gives us our entree into that. So real problems there. So if we think we have headaches now, any of you going into or working, anybody working in the mobile space right now? So one person, two people, a little bit. So there's a lot of frustration there. The one beacon of hope is Opera Software doing some really, really solid work. And of course, in in non-traditional platforms. You know, a lot of people make fun of Opera saying, oh, it's the browser that failed. Actually, while they were failing on the desktop, they were making very good relationships and building great software for alternative devices. And so this is where they've really been strong. So hopefully we'll see some good work there. Concern regarding user agents. What do we do with our browsers? And of course, as I've mentioned, internationalization is coming on hard and fast. Hard and fast. If you haven't yet been asked to do something that involves reaching another culture in another language, and your job has anything possibly remotely involved with delivering information to someone who speaks a different language somewhere else in the world, this is going to become of issue to you. So web standards, very, very important. It is not the be-all and end-all. As one of the world's most well-known web standards evangelists, I do not believe that every page must validate. I do not believe that, you know, there are hard and fast rules here. I see faults on the W3C side. I see faults in the browser developers. And, you know, we're all trying to make it better. That's what's important. Okay, so visual design, breaking out of boxes. In our Transcending CSS session, the general session at the end of the day, we're going to talk about just this. You know, when you do table-based layouts, everything's very rigid grid, okay? And in order to really break out of that, you have to do very heavy graphic work. You create, you know, the slice and dice table methodology, right? So very heavy graphics, heavy-duty tables. In order to get that, unless you really are starting to learn CSS very well and moving beyond the limitations of that and into really figuring out, okay, wait, we can do that, that, and that. Now let's see what we can do beyond that. Over lunch, we said this, I said this, and I reiterate it now because it's really the right time. And that's that CSS was written by scientists, okay? In February, I attended the W3C Technical Plenary Week, and Andy joined me there. And we went and there were 3 full days of the CSS working group, of which I'm not a member, and he's not a member of the W3C at all. I'm an invited expert there. But they let us both in, and it was really interesting. We go around the table, about 20 people introducing themselves, and Andy's the last person, and you know, we're saying what we are, what we do. And Andy says, well, I'm Andy Clark, and I'm a designer. And everybody in the room laughed. And Ian Hickson, who now works at Google, pipes up and says, oh, the W3C doesn't think there are any designers in this world. And, you know, everybody laughed at that too. But the sobering reality is that that is the first time. 1994 is when CSS was proposed. CSS1 became available in 1996. Okay? We are now at CSS2. We have 2.1 on the brink, which is just, we're using 2.1 anyway, and 3.0 being developed. And this is the first time a visual designer has sat in the room. That is why CSS is a monster, because it wasn't built for designers. It was built for programmers. But who is doing design? Yes, certainly programmers can put on a design house. Many of us are multi-talented, and I would never discourage. In fact, I deeply encourage that. Always, you know, see what how the other half lives. There are rare few people that now can do both quite well, right? But this is really part of the problem. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in visual design later on this afternoon. And of course, understanding that standards does not necessarily equal limitations. In fact, somebody excited me over lunch because they saw the potential as a designer. And this is really important. I want to encourage visual designers especially to understand that the learning curve doesn't necessarily mean you're limited. There are resources out there for you, good ones, books, blogs, all kinds of free information. There's an excellent wiki, all this kind of stuff that I can make sure you get if you don't have that information in our next session when I talk more about CSS especially. So this is really important. I want to encourage people to look at CSS at least conceptually if they're not interested and or ready yet to really dig into the code, that it's not about limiting, it's actually about freeing. There is more opportunity in CSS for designers than we really understand. And I think that the CSS Zen Garden goes a long way to show that there are, you know, constantly new designs being vetted there, and you look at them and you realize, wow, that's just CSS and some markup. So it's pretty amazing, and you see some real break out of the box designs that are accessible, work well, do all the things that we want them to do. And CSS brings very powerful design options. As I said, the learning curve, you know, it must be addressed. This issue, this gap has to be addressed. And this is something that both I and Andy are working very, very hard on, as well as other people. Very interested, especially as an educator, I'm so interested in figuring out ways to get visual thinkers more easily more comfortable with learning the aspects of CSS that will empower them, and vice versa, getting developers to think visually so that there's better communication between these groups in order to, because that's where the innovation is going to come from. When you get people together who understand different aspects of it, you get those folks together, and real innovation can then, real dialogue can begin. Bless you, by the way. So trends are worth watching. We've got to pay attention to the hot topics, okay? But we have to have an idea of what's going on in visual design. There are some things I'll show you this afternoon about trends in the visual that are a little disturbing to me. And of course, there are limitations, and I'll talk more about this, a lot more about this, limitations with only looking at the web. Don't just look at other websites in order to figure out how to do a website. Look at magazines. Look outside. Look to other forms of media, okay? Interactive design, all kinds of things that exist out there. And I find that a lot of designers just look at other websites, and that's very limiting because it just creates that cycle you never break out of. And look for organic inspiration. In other words, look for natural inspiration, textures, colors. Really start thinking about these things, because we haven't really had the power to do as much of that unless we're working maybe in an environment like just with Flash, right? So we have more now to do. Okay, so JavaScript. We now see JavaScript emerging really, really strongly, reemergence. This time around, we sort of wanted to change the name because actually there are different types of scripts that you can be using. But really, the idea is that anything that is touching the DOM, the document object model, which is the browser interface that allows a script to attach to an element in your markup and modify it, okay? So that interface, right, is the DOM, and so we call it DOM scripting. And there's this focus on what is known as unobtrusive JavaScript, and if you haven't heard this term yet, I highly encourage you to check it out if you're interested in JavaScript at all. What unobtrusive JavaScript means is that if we take the JavaScript away, the functionality is still there. It may take an extra step or two, okay? So we might not have as smooth a transition in a form, for example. We may have to go through 2 or 3 pages. But if the JavaScript is not available, it still works. Right now, and I can tell you a story. I was sitting with a friend of mine who is blind, and he uses a little, he uses an IBM, and he's got a screen reader, and the screen reader reads out the page to him. We're sitting in France at this technical plenary meeting in the W3C, so this guy's a very highly technical person. We do, when we're in the meetings, we do all of our minutes on IRC channel, right? So communication goes on IRC, so you all need to be connected to the network. So Orange is a big provider of services in Europe and the UK. And so we were using Orange Network and their Wi-Fi. So he tries to get in, and there's a little JavaScript, just a little JavaScript validation form. All it was name, password, and then submit. And there was a validator on that completely, because of his inability to access the JavaScript, completely didn't allow him to log in. What he had to do was follow the path to the script, locate in the script the URL he actually had to get to, and then put that into his browser and go around it. But only a real genius like this individual could have done that, okay? Not acceptable. Not acceptable. That means that everybody who's trying to sign in to Orange Network that is blind can't. What does that say about your love for your customer? Not good. So these sorts of things are becoming obviously not just accessibility. Again, this is fundamental good usability, good design. It doesn't, there's always a fallback. So maybe it's prettier with the JavaScript there. Maybe it's faster. Or you have some lovely effect, like Flickr is a good example of that. Where you have some nice effect that occurs on change or whatever. But there's got to be a fallback. Otherwise, it's not usable. We externalize our scripts for better performance. I'll show you that in the next session as well. We are more responsible and mature with our JavaScript code. I don't know about everybody here, but JavaScript always used to intimidate me. And I would do things like go to Matt's script archives and copy and paste. And hey, it worked. Great. But a lot of those scripts are poorly written, could be a lot more streamlined, could be a lot more useful, all of that. So we're now beginning to mature our approach to JavaScript, which is very exciting. And that's where we're getting a lot of this Web 2.0 hype about. So again, a combination of technologies to revitalize and enhance web features. And of course, Ajax, which brings us to Ajax. And this is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Something that, as a majority of visual designers in here, probably are thinking, great, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. What does that do for me as a visual designer? Actually, it can do some really neat things for you. And that's part of the goal here, is to begin separating out what's some of the hype and how this might help you. So a good example is just what I described, where you have a form, and you might enhance that form with JavaScript so that as the focus on the form, say I click in the form field, it appears in a different color, or something occurs that gives me some kind of usability cue. All of that would exist via JavaScript, via Ajax, right? And it would be a very seamless and lovely experience, because what Ajax does essentially is you don't have to see that page refresh, right? It's the XML HTTP request is allowing the queries to go back to the server, and it doesn't appear to you in the browser. So if a JavaScript didn't exist in an unobtrusive JavaScript methodology, then there wouldn't be that lovely, elegant thing, but there'd still be a click-through process, okay? So Ajax also allows a means of communicating with a server without refreshing the current page, as I just said. And the client-server relationship, this is what distinguishes Ajax from what we used to call DHTML. Remember that, DHTML? Dynamic HTML. It, like Ajax, it was also not at all what it said it was. It was a collection of technologies. DHTML, Dynamic Hypertext Markup Language. There is no language called DHTML. What it was a set of JavaScript, or VBScript at the time was used a great deal, because for those of you who remember, anybody remember those first browser wars? It was all about the DOM. You know, the div versus the layer element in Netscape 4. Remember that, anybody? How many people here remember those days? So, quite a few of you do. And it's interesting to me that many of you don't. You're free of that, and it makes me feel good. It's like, hey, we did get somewhere. But this is the distinguishing factor. So dynamic HTML was a combination of JavaScript or VBScript with the document object model in order to effect changes on your HTML elements, and you could use CSS to make those modifications. So essentially, you could create animations. You could create all kinds of nifty, drop-down menus. DHTML is mostly known for that. Ajax, the difference is, see, with DHTML, it would run all in the browser. The browser was completely responsible for interpreting all those commands. With Ajax, we have a client-server relationship going on, whereas the user is using the interface that you've designed and coded. What happens is seamlessly to them, there's actually a conversation going on between the server, and the server is getting back information to help make those changes, okay? Whereas before, it was all in the browser. So it's a very interesting approach. And Ajax is also a grouping of technologies, and for those of you who have ever had the opportunity to hear Jesse James Garrett speak from Adaptive Path, he is the father of the word Ajax, certainly not of the technology. But he had a client, and he was having trouble articulating, well, we do this thing with asynchronous JavaScript and the extensible markup language and a little bit of XSLT thrown in there. Of course, the client is rolling their eyes back in their head. Hey, Ajax, wow, that sounds cool, right? So that's really where it came from, and it consists of XHTML or HTML, along with server-side languages, sometimes PHP, ASP, things like that, JavaScript, the DOM, and the XML HTTP request. That, by the way, was given to us freely by a company that we've been angry with for a long time. Any guesses? Yeah, exactly. So this is something now that Microsoft has absolutely contributed to the web. So very, very good. Ajax at its most simple in a visual way. So you see you have a web page. There's a relationship with this XML HTTP request object, right? And it goes to the server. And basically, it's doing this. It's saying, OK, I want to do this to that, and bringing it over there, delivering it to the client side so that the customer, the user, gets the effect that you want. Okay? So there are some variants on Ajax that it's good to know about. And again, this is sort of like where it gets really kind of icky, because it's like, wait, there's so many ways to skin a cat. Which do I use and why? So this is asynchronous HTML and HTTP, and it can be considered an Ajax subset. It's a microformat. I'm going to talk about microformats in just a minute. It uses inner HTML along with XML HTTP request. Inner HTML is pretty powerful. So using AHA, it's very fast, it's easy to style using CSS, which of course is something we're interested in from the CSS and design side. And there's no need for transformation technology. So essentially you're making a request to the server and it's delivering it back without an extra step to make it easy for non-technical people in the room. But it has to be used with XHTML served as text HTML. In other words, if you're using XHTML, you can't use it the way that XHTML should be used. And that's a different argument for a break, but I can explain that if anybody is interested in that particular bullet point. But herein lies the real interesting piece about AHA. Inner HTML itself, that particular element, is proprietary and controversial because it's proprietary. So people are like, well, why are you putting something proprietary into your code when it's not going to validate? Well, because it works. But to quote my friend Jeremy Keith, who is a wonderful DOM scripting author and educator, he's got a couple of good, I think he's got one book out now called DOM Scripting. Very, very good book for people. It's written especially for people who have more of a design background. Well, I shouldn't say more of a design background, but that it's not meant for programmers. It's really a good book to kind of get your feet wet if you're interested in JavaScript at all. So then we have something called JSON, okay? And this is another subset. This is called JavaScript Object Notation. It is a nested list of name-value pairs. Okay, so very simple structure to JSON. It doesn't require this particular object that's in the middle of things. You can, and this is where it gets really interesting. You can use the document object model to change the source value of the script element, allowing you to use services from different sites. Now think about that for a second. What if Google has some great script that I want to pull in to my own site and make use of? This is how I can do it. Okay? That sounds really cool, and it is, but it requires a trustworthy source. If you have any security issues, if you're working for government, for example, this is not the choice for you. Okay? Or if it is, it better be a very trustworthy source. You're actually going to another site to pull in data, to pull in functionality. Okay? Kind of interesting, important to be aware of, understand it's related to Ajax, and that it can be very powerful, but it also has big security concerns around it. So do you really need any of all of this? How is it helping you? Well, I don't know. Again, I think that's a case-by-case question. So which do you use, though? Okay, so if you do use any of them, choose the best option for a given task, right? A hammer for a hammer, a screwdriver where you need to screw in the screw, okay? If you're updating many parts of a document at once, Ajax is very, very good for that. So a page like, most people here are familiar with Flickr, right? Right? Okay, so if you're not, Flickr has now become the new thing, is to drop the E and put the R. And so Flickr.com, it's a photo sharing community. It's absolutely a beautiful site. And it uses a lot of Ajax. So it's so on a whole page there might be 8 or 10 interface issues that are being handled by Ajax, and you don't see the page update as you make changes. You only see the discrete. So let's say, for a good example would be, I look at a photo and I've titled the photo in H1, right? So it's big, bold, and ugly. Kidding. All right. Come on. You can laugh a little louder. All right. I mean, my jokes aren't that good, but you got to humor me a little. All right. So you have the header, and then you have your photo. And what's so nice about on Flickr, you just click the header, and suddenly you get a form input field, right? And that has a different color, obviously, to alert you to it. This is where the style and the design comes in. And then I can type live into that page the title, click save, and all that disappears, and my title appears, but the whole page doesn't refresh, just that one little section. That is Ajax in action. So multiple instances of this on a page, Ajax is great. If you're just doing one piece, inner HTML might be a possibility. And if you're retrieving data from another source, JSON is the only current option. But that's a little experimental again, but fun, good to know about. So before we wrap up and go to questions and answers, I do want to talk to you about something very interesting that's going on called microformats. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what is known as the uppercase semantic web and the lowercase semantic web. By the way, this photo is a close-up that I actually took from a plane. I was on an experimental flight at a Boeing airfield last year. And we did a fly around of Mount Rainier 3 times. this guy got very, very close, and he tells us, he gets over the loudspeaker, he says, you know, Boeing doesn't have to follow the FAA regulations. We can bring this baby really close. He tilts the plane like this, and we are just like, whoa! We're like looking right down on Mount Rainier. So I took some shots there and thought it might be fun to put him into the... But that's actually almost to the top. Absolutely amazing. How many people here are from Seattle? It's a great city. How many people have come from other places just for the conference? Wow, that's awesome. Okay, uppercase semantic web. This is the real Web 2.0 as it was envisioned by Tim Berners-Lee, the father of the web, and W3C members and invited experts. It is semantics. It is about this meaning thing that I was talking about earlier for machines first and people second. In other words, how do we get machines to talk to each other in some way? And the goal is to allow access to massive, multiple sources of information from personal data to enterprise-level applications to global sharing of stuff. Basically, what it does is it creates the opportunity, if you have the right browser and the semantic web are really working today, to do retrieval of information from massive, massive resources. And as designers and developers, you can then begin pulling in whatever those free resources are into your own website and reusing them, sort of like free API kind of concept, okay? So very, very fascinating idea, very broad idea. And it is built on two technologies out of the W3C. One is the resource description format, RDF, and the other is OWL, Web Ontology Language. And obviously these, just from their description, are highly technical. The implementations of them are very far away. Each particular instance of, so you have the RDF, but then each thing that you're trying to do, like let's say somebody said they were working in medical field. So let's say I work in the medical field. I have a set of terminology, right? I have an ontology, a grouping of words, language, semantics that describe things that are unique to that industry, right? So with this model, each industry basically has to have its own ontology, its own language. As you can imagine, that would take years and years and years to put together. Is it being done? In small ways, yes, it's being done. But it's very difficult, and it relies on technologies, as I say here, still in their infancy, and there are very true implementations. On the other hand, we have something called microformats. Three guys, some of whose names you might recognize, got together and thought about this whole semantic web thing the way that Berners-Lee had it, and they thought, wait a second. This is Eric Meyer, of course, very well known for his work with CSS. Probably those of you who are learning CSS or have learned CSS have at some point read an Eric Meyer book. Michael has, have you ever signed him? Oh, he's one of yours, okay. So and Michael here has signed him to books, and anyway, he's a very, very fine educator as well. So Eric Meyer and Tontek Chelik, whose name is extremely important in this industry for multiple reasons. You'll hear why, not only for microformats, but that's his big thing right now. And Matt Mullenweg, who is now all of 21 or 22 years old and created WordPress when he was, I don't know, 16, something like that. So, you know, three guys sitting around talking geek and coming up with this whole idea of extending XHTML and using it to create the semantic web today. So this is called the lowercase. And in this case, human first. So the semantic part of it becomes very important. We have to all agree on some terminology. And it extends existing technologies. Instead of having to rewrite or reinvent the wheel in this case, we have existing technologies upon which we build XML, XHTML. Okay? So practicable implementations, the same type of stuff that Semantic Web tries to do, but we can do it now. So like calendars, shareable event lists, customized search, social and professional relationship management, like all your stuff. Like one of the things that microformats really embraces is this concept of open data formats. I don't know about anybody else here, but I travel with a Mac, and I have Windows machines in my office, along with another Mac, okay? One of the most frustrating things I have is moving data around. How do I take, out of Entourage, my email, and put it into Outlook, two Microsoft products that don't even talk to each other, okay? How many people have problems like that? Moving your data around, moving your stuff from place to place, right? It's an issue because there is no open data. Everybody's got a proprietary data format. Microformats say, it's got to be open so that we can all share it. What's the point of having all of this personal information in Plaxo when not everybody is going to get Plaxo, right? Or what have you. vCard, for example, okay? We now have HCard, which is the microformat, and it works today, and you simply mark it up, and you'll see examples of it in the general session, and how it can be designed also. So it's useful now for the foreseeable future. So you have HCalendar, which any calendar of events, so the entire calendar on the Faucet website could be made into a microformat, and then I could easily click a download link and it automatically go into my iCal or to my Outlook Express or my Outlook or whatever I'm using and fill up each day with the events automatically. The same thing with HCard, all of my personal information. If I created that on my site, you hit download and it automatically goes into your address book. Kind of cool, huh? Useful now. This is doable now. So this is the kind of thing that the uppercase semantic web wanted to do and did not achieve, or has not yet achieved. So microformats do it now. And the entire Technorati search engine, which is a blog search engine, for those of you unfamiliar, very interesting search engine that has been challenged in a way that many search engines haven't, because its goal is to update content almost immediately. Because how often, I mean, you can imagine how many bloggers at this moment, what an interesting question, how many bloggers at this moment are hitting publish, right? Lots. I don't know the number, but there are lots of them. And Technorati's goal is to know upon publishing that information and catalog it and make it searchable. So they're trying to solve a certain problem, and they're using microformats to do it. It's really fascinating. So the way I compare the two, semantic web to microformats, both are ways of thinking about data. Semantic web thinks about the machines talking to each other first, worries about people later. Humans first with microformats, which I like because I already told you I'm a little bit touchy-feely in that way. Semantic web, creation and development of these new ontologies, these new languages, so that's going to take time. Right now, microformats extend existing technologies. And with the semantic web, we require a whole new generation of software, new browsers, new everything, in order to go out there and manage all of this mass data. Right now, we're using existing software and browsers and various user agents for the microformat, lowercase semantic web. So it's all here now. And anybody can write one, microformats.org. Very, very interesting group, open standards all the way. So can anybody tell me who said this? We need microformats? That's a good guess, because it is, in fact, Bill Gates in an interview with Tim O'Reilly at Mix 06 just this year. And hearing that, it's actually a great interview. If you haven't seen this interview and this interests you at all, I highly recommend it. I think it's mix06.com. So it's Tim O'Reilly, the father of open source, interviewing Bill Gates, the father of proprietary software. And it's absolutely fascinating because I've never found Bill Gates to be that dynamic a speaker on his own. But in this interview, he absolutely comes to life, and it is a great discussion. Now, microformats have been around, I don't know, a couple of years, and it's already trickled up to Bill Gates. Semantic web hasn't. That's very interesting to me. So it says that something's moving there. And as you'll see in the later session, this does involve design, because how are we going to design that calendar? How are we going to make that look, right, on the page? How are we going to make this usable, useful? Really, really cool stuff. So to get back around to the final piece that I want to leave you with, which is how I like to look at the whole Web 2.0 and how do I look at what's going on. I compare business, the idea of business. I like the idea of productivity. When Web 2.0 jargon says network, I like to think about community, people, what's really going on. When I hear Web 2.0 people talk about society, that's an abstract thing to me. I want to know about humanity. And when they talk about transparency, just because you can look through something doesn't mean that what you're seeing on the other side is real, right? But you hear the word transparency all the time. Well, my business is transparent. What does that really mean? I'm not so sure I trust that. My business is transparent. I don't get it. Now, authenticity makes a lot of sense to me. So with that, I'd like to open up for questions and answers for a few minutes before we say, I think we have after this like a few-minute break, and then we come back for some CSS. So anybody? Questions? Hopefully I have answers for you. Commentary? Anybody? Don't be shy. You know if you've got one, 10 people in the room have it too.
What kind of impact is, I don't remember his name, the designer on the board, the CSS board, has he already had an impact on?
Oh, Andy, yeah. Andy, yes, he has had an impact. In fact, this was also a great story. I think I told it at lunch. I love telling this story, how Andy was sitting there, and here's Halcom Lee, who is the CTO of Opera Software and the co-father with Bert Voss of CSS. Okay, they're the technologists, the scientists that built the technology. Andy is sitting there, and he says, Halcom, come over here and take a look at what I'm doing. And in it, he had this like beautiful grid of images, right, that were all hyperlinked. And as you moused over them, the text underneath, the link, right, that image was also linked to would be highlighted. Okay, so it was very beautiful, really nice, smooth interface. And Halcom's like, wow, that's really cool. That must be some great JavaScript. And Andy turns to him and says, JavaScript? I don't write JavaScript. I'm a CSS guy and a designer. and Halcom says, that can't be CSS. It has to be script. And he dropped out the code, or he dropped out the visuals, using the web developer toolbar. And all there was an unordered list with links and a paragraph with text with links in it. No images in line. The document was about that long. And the CSS file contained, using hover and focus is how he got those different dynamic, which of course focus not supported IE6 right now, but IE7 will have it. I believe that to be true. And hover on all elements will be there for sure. So it was really interesting to see one of the co-fathers of CSS not see his own technology as a designer sees it, which meant to me it's long overdue for somebody like that to be working with these people. Yes?
That seems to be a question we keep coming back to. CSS against Microsoft agenda.
Okay.
Very well and good saying what CSS can do now and what it may or may not be able to do in IE7.
Right.
That depends on the moving goalposts of Microsoft.
It does and it doesn't. IE7 is pretty locked down right now. And in fact, there is an IE7 toolkit, so an IE7 compatibility toolkit. And I'll address this in the next session. You mean the next session with me? Okay, so I'll address that. I'll talk about readiness for IE7 and what it really means to us. So that is an interesting question. Microsoft's agendas do go with the wind. So yes, one more and then we take a break. One more question. Thanks.
You've given us a good overview of some of the tools and technologies that are starting to be developed. As a person who's never used DOM or DOM or what would be your roadmap to get going on this? How do we get the project started?
Right. How do you learn it? Really, really good question. Obviously, not easily answered. Again, I have to point to a few books that are very, very good. Look for anything right now. Any of the Ajax books that are out there, any of the DOM scripting, almost all of them are very fine. The JavaScript book, it's called DOM Scripting. I think it's just DOM Scripting by Jeremy Keith is an excellent starting point. I don't think it would be too technical for people who at least have a technical exposure, if not knowledge, practical knowledge. Pardon me? Jeremy Keith, K-I-E-T-H, whatever, it's I-before-E or whatever. Keith, K-E-I-T-H. Anyway, so his book is great. I highly recommend that. Like, I took a full day Ajax seminar with him in London, and I know he's traveling around. He's going to Florida, they're traveling around doing workshops. So going to work like a one-day workshop can often be very, very helpful because you get the basics. And somebody like Jeremy, I highly recommend if you see. I'm very biased toward him because he's a fabulous teacher. I relate to him as an educator. So if you spend a day with him, you really walk away going, okay, now it makes sense to me. What I love that he does is he takes JavaScript and then he interprets it into English. So he shows JavaScript as English and then HTML. It makes it work for me. Let's go have a break, okay? And we'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks.